Hey there, Gunfighter. I'm putting this out again, not because I'm starving for content. By God's grace, got a backlog of content, but this came out on Thanksgiving, and many times when there's a holiday and episodes come out, they don't do that well, which is understandable. But I think this is an important episode, so I know there are people that scroll back and listen to older episodes, but many will just listen to whatever episode pops up, I think. So I'm going to put this in here again. Gunfighter wisdom. And maybe you liked it so much the first time that you'll listen again. I appreciate you. Have a blessed day. Gunfighters. Gather round. Maybe grab a cup of coffee. Kick back. Let me share some gunfighter wisdom. You see, that's the second main reason I do the podcast. The first is to serve God, to make godly men strong and strong men godly. Secondarily, to share wisdom that I've been blessed to accrue surviving a lot of experience as a professional gunfighter. If you're listening to this episode, you've probably heard the bio before, so I'm going to forego it today and just say saddle up for another episode of Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, gear, the right way, with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. So today, an episode with a lot of hopefully useful gunfighter wisdom that I've been blessed to accrue over the years. And I do this mostly to help you guys, to pass it on, right? It's not mostly for me. It's certainly not mostly for the money. It's to help, to pass on wisdom. Blessings are meant to be shared. So, let's get into it, shall we? Much like a good father, I think, teaching a kid how to drive, if they have the ability, teach them to drive on a manual transmission. Teach them to drive a stick shift. The equivalent to that in gunfighting, learn how to shoot iron sights. I don't care if you want to run an optic. I don't care if the gun comes with an optic. Learn to shoot iron sights. Learn to master the fundamentals with iron sights. I do certainly agree that optics can be a force multiplier. They can enhance the speed and or accuracy of a device. But I still think you should learn how to drive a stick. I still think you should learn how to shoot iron sights. With a rifle, with a .22 or with an AR, with a good set of iron sights, you should be proficient and knowledgeable how to use, how to adjust, how to run iron sights. Learn that hard front sight focus. Learn proper sight alignment and a sight picture. I think those are really good, timeless skills to have. Another piece of wisdom here. There's more to a training session, to going to the range, than just the guns and the ammo. Spend so much on the gun that you don't have stuff left over. The other stuff that's important. There's a lot that should go into your range kit that's really important. What's that saying? Something like, tell me you're a noob without telling me you're a noob. Go to the range and don't have a Sharpie. Right? You go to the range, you just have a Sharpie, if it's not even part of your EDC already. I'm not saying you never ever forget your Sharpie. Hopefully you don't forget your gun. But the exception proves the rule. Pretty much every time you go to the range, you should have a Sharpie. You should have some kind of fastening device in your kit. And a backup, whether it's tape, tacks, baling wire, right, whatever, because stuff goes wrong on the range, right? Stuff blows down, stuff blows over. And good, solid targets. Unless you're just going out to plink and have fun, not just whatever's at the range, not just whatever the range has to sell. How are you gauging the metrics on how good you are, how much you're progressing or not progressing, if you're just randomly picking targets? Give some thought of all the hours you spend. Is this gun right for me? Is the Daniel Defense really worth more than the BCM AR? Is what's best for me in my life right now? Is it a red dot with a magnifier? Is it an LPVO? And what about, do I want to true co-witness or a lower 1/3 or blah blah, and you spend all the time and stuff on that minutia, which I get, but then you don't have a Sharpie, or you don't have proper targets, or you don't have the proper way to attach the targets to whatever you're shooting at, your target stands, or you've got a gun that has a bunch of hex attachments and something comes loose and you don't have the proper hex or Torx bit, and you don't have blue Loctite. Like, it's not just about guns and ammo. There's so much other stuff. Pay attention to the other stuff. It can make a big difference. Maybe more of a difference in your training sessions and regiments than whether you got the Daniel Defense or the BCM, right? The fact that you put the 5 cents worth of blue Loctite on your screws, your gun's not shooting all over the place and you can't figure it out. And when you do figure it out, you can't fix it, so you've wasted a day, right? There's more than just the gun, especially when you go to a range session. So a little bit of gunfighter wisdom there. Since I touched on the torque and the Torx bit and the blue Loctite, here's a good piece of gunfighter wisdom, gunsmithing wisdom. More is only more to a point, and then it becomes less when it comes to torque. You should know proper torque. When you're torquing something down, a scope, an optic, an attachment, if it says 25 inch-pounds, don't give it 50. Somebody that's been there and done that, right? It's only more until it's not, until you snap the screw or snap the hex bit or strip it out or crush an optic, put it under so much tension that you compromise the screw or the threads. Understand proper torque, and more is not always more. More is only more to a point, and then it becomes less. Pay attention to the torque. Another piece of gunfighter / gunsmithing wisdom. Somebody that's been here and done this too many times, probably more than I should have. Learned this lesson more than once. If you're frustrated with a project, with a gun project, with a shooting session, take a break. Go walk away. Take a breather. Don't slam the thing down on the ground. Don't throw it. Don't just try to force something. If you're trying to assemble a gun, it should pretty much always go together pretty easily. If it doesn't, don't force it. If you force something, you're likely to break it. If you can't figure something out, you're getting frustrated, set it down, take a walk, take a breather, even come back tomorrow if you have to. It's better many times to just take a pause and take a breather than to force something and break something. It's another piece of gunfighter wisdom. You're having a bad day at the range, you're missing your target, just assume that it's you, right? Don't blame it on the gear, don't make excuses. Assume that it's you. Now, the better you get at gunfighting, the more that you progress, the more you'll find out, oh, it actually is the gear. Oh, there actually is something wrong with this gear. But if you're fairly new to handgun shooting, right, and you're shooting low and to the left, it's probably not because your sights are off. It's probably because you're flinching. And you could extrapolate that into many other circumstances. But as a general rule, just assume that it's you. And be pleasantly surprised if it's the gear that's broken. I'm actually generally pretty happy when I find out it's the gear and it's not me. Because gear is generally easier to fix than me. But in general, assume it's you. And be happy when it's not. And this is a big one. This next one, as far as monetary stuff goes. And as far as chasing the next thing goes, and frustration in and of its own right. Stop chasing that next latest and greatest thing. If it's really the next greatest thing, it'll be around in a couple of years. Unless you're just a guy that wants to experiment with the latest and greatest stuff and you just have money to burn, in which case, go for it. If you're talking about for a practical gunfighter, everybody gets excited when there's a new hot gun dropping on YouTube, or the new hot caliber. And maybe I used to be that way too. In fact, I probably was. But as time went on, I realized, whoa, those are the things to stay away from, the things that the people are most excited about. I'm thinking about another episode that I might record, by God's grace, sometime soon, called The Cartridge Graveyard. But think of how many cartridges have come out in just recent history that are supposed to be the latest and greatest, and have just ended up in the cartridge graveyard. What if you'd have went out and just bought a 224 Valkyrie because it was going to replace the 223, right? Where's the 224 Valkyrie now? If you'd have dumped all your 9mm and went hard into 30 Super Carry, that one's only a year or two old. It's already pretty much a dying cartridge. What if you'd have just come into guns and been super excited about that abomination of a gun, that Springfield Helion, that atrocious looking bullpup that came out a year or two ago that everybody was excited about? And like ARs are the thing of the past. I'm going to jump on the Springfield Helion bandwagon, right? No, stop chasing it. If it's really that good, then it'll become the dominant thing. Unless you just want to be a beta tester. But in general, you know my rule, if you listen for any length of time, let something be out and proven for around 3 years before you trust your life to it. If you just want to be a beta tester and just burn a bunch of money on an experimental thing that's probably, let's be honest, going to be doomed to obscurity, and stop chasing the latest and greatest. Sometimes things are the standard for a reason. 9mm are really good around and it's really hard to beat. And that may not always be the de facto defensive cartridge of our time, but it is now. I'm saying there's not ever a place for other calibers, but it ain't the Stud 30 Super Carry. Right? 5.56 223 is not the greatest intermediate cartridge, but it ain't 224 Valkyrie, right? It probably ain't gonna be 22 Arc, the one that just came to mind that just popped out of the ammo company's womb. Don't go swooning over that. If it's that great, we'll see where it is in a couple of years. But when it comes to anything like that, if it has something like game changer, be wary of that. Revolutionary, right? These kind of marketing terms. Don't be led astray by the hype in the marketing. I'm not saying there's never a reason to buck the mainstream. Like, I prefer piston to direct impingement on a lot of stuff. Right, but a lot of those systems, they've been around for a while and they're pretty proven. They might not be as popular, but they're a proven, reliable system in many cases, like a SCAR. But don't always be chasing the latest and greatest. That's just a good marketing way to separate you from your money. Again, if it's you and it's your money and you just have money to burn, then go for it. But realize you're doing that to be a beta tester, not because it's actually going to end up being better in the long term. Okay, here is another one, and this may, if you're really into ballistics and a ballistics nerd like me, it may seem elementary, but it's not to everybody. And this is really easy to draw, but it's fairly hard in audio, so forgive the bland description, but let me paint you a audio form picture here. If I took a barrel that had no taper, right? The bore was straight and the outside of the barrel was straight. And I put a level, like a carpenter's level, like you'd build with a level, and I put that on the barrel and made it exactly level. And then I took a scope with some scope rings that were flat on the top, and I laid a level on top of those, and those were completely level. And both of those things were plumb, true, completely level. That gun, that rifle in this case, would never shoot where the sight was. It would never shoot where that scope was. Why? Because the barrel is several inches in most cases, or at least an inch and a half. It's below the optic. So they would never ever line up. Understand this, that as soon as, if that barrel is level, which it's probably not going to be in actual shooting, but for the scientific experiment, if the barrel is level, as soon as that bullet leaves the barrel, it starts to drop. Period. It never rises above the bore line. If it starts out level, it will immediately drop below level. The only reason it rises because we aim the barrel up. So the bullet is always an arc. I don't care how fast it is. I don't care how flat shooting it's supposed to be, right? Even, what did we just make fun of a little bit? The 224 Valkyrie. Super flat shooting cartridge. It actually is. More flat shooting and more of a flat line trajectory it can be than a 223, but it doesn't matter the cartridge. Doesn't matter if it's a 220 Swift. It still fires in an arc. The way we get around this is we aim that barrel up. Now, I don't want to get into experimental physics, but as far as on this earth, from our observation, line of vision, light, is not affected by gravity. We're not talking about a black hole or something, right? The way that you see is in a straight line. The way that you see is not affected by gravity. The way you look through that optic is a straight line. Again, if both those were level, the barrel and the sight, they would never line up. You would never aim where the sight was. You would never hit where you were aiming at. You aim the barrel up so that it crosses that line of sight. Say now that optic, that scope, is level. You raise the barrel up in relation to the sight so that it shoots up and it will cross over. Let's say the crosshairs of that scope, or that red dot, it crosses, or the front sight, it crosses that optic. Where those two converge, where there's no difference, that is called your zero. And that's pretty simple, but I think a lot of people don't realize you have two zeros. You have a near zero and a far zero. You'll never have any other zeros. You will have two zeros. This is why. That bullet is aimed up. The bore is aimed up, so it fires that projectile up in an arc. You think of like a rainbow and you draw a straight line through the rainbow. When it crosses the first time, that's your close zero. It will be a little bit higher than the sight for a while. And then it will again cross over that red dot, or those crosshairs, in somewhere in the distance. A real common one for an AR, there's two real common ones. Think about that if you think about how steep an arc it is. The real common one is the 50-250. Won't be exact depending on a lot of factors. Ammunition selection, all kinds of factors. Height over bore, but it will, let's say for a crude rule, it will cross over. You zero it at 50 yards. So you know it's zeroed at 50 yards. It's probably zeroed again somewhere at 250. Maybe it's 225 or whatever, but you get the idea. My Scar 17, for example, it's zeroed at 50, it's zeroed at 225. It crosses, it shoots the same place, both those places in that arc, in that rainbow. It crosses that straight line. For an AR, it might be 50 and 200. Or you can go with a steeper arc and do the 25 and 300. But obviously, if you looked at that arc, it would also rise higher. You'd have to compensate for that. Just understanding that simple trajectory. If my gun is zeroed at 50 and I'm shooting at 100, I'm going to have to aim low because my rounds are going to impact high. Why? Because it's high on that rainbow, on that arc. It's already crossed its first zero and it has not yet recrossed into its second zero. Now after the second zero, let's say I'm zeroed 50 and 200. If I'm shooting at 275, I got to aim high. Why? Because it's already dropped my second zero and it's never going to rise again. It's only going to drop more and more and more. But I think just a lot of people getting into shooting, they don't realize that. And forgive me, I know that's really elementary if you're deep into the ballistic stuff, but I don't think a lot of people getting into guns really understand that. Okay, here is another big one that I think a lot of men fall victim to. Call it the Tim the Toolman Taylor fallacy, right? If you're old enough to remember that. This was way back when I had a television. This was back in the 90s or something. Tim the Toolman Taylor, Tool Time, I think was the name of the show. Home Improvement, now that I think about it. Home Improvement was the name of the show. Tool Time was the name of his show. It was a show about a show. Like the Twilight Zone kind of show inside a show or something. But anyway, his big thing was more power. He would take something and give it more power. And in general, it didn't work out very well. Right? Realize that in the world of ballistics. There is no free lunch. That's how Newtonian physics works. That's how, not even Newtonian physics, he didn't make physics, right? God made physics. But for every action, there's an equal and an opposite reaction. There is no free lunch. If you want more power coming out of the front end, you get more recoil. And I think a lot of times a consumer will buy something based on what's paper impressive, not what actually performs well in their hands. Because a printed page looking at trajectories and foot-pounds numbers, stuff can look really impressive. But you're only seeing half of that equation. The recoil numbers, right? When I was, before I joined the Marine Corps at 17, I was a lifeguard. When it was slow, I was a ballistics nerd even back then, I would study ballistics tables. This was like, the internet existed, but you didn't have smartphones or cell phones or anything. So I would sit in my lifeguard chair and study ballistics tables. I had it in my mind that the rifle that I needed to have, that I was working and saved up to buy, was a 7mm Remington Magnum. Alright? I didn't live in Wyoming. I lived on the eastern shore, right? The Delmarva Peninsula. And I grew up a poor boy in the South, right? I didn't have access to a lot of private farms or these long shots or anything. I was hunting like swamps. Right? I needed a 7mm Remington Magnum like a diabetic needs a gift certificate to a candy store. I did not need a 7mm Remington Magnum. But I saved up and I bought one because looking at these tables, just on paper, it looked like such a great round. And it is a great round if you care about that one side of the equation. There's no free lunch. More recoil, more cost per round, harder to get ammo than something like a 308, which would have served me just fine. Also, I like to shoot. I like to practice. I don't know anybody that likes to go and put 50 rounds through a hunting weight Magnum. When I, later in life, I found as a professional hunter and guide, better off with less on paper foot-pounds or things like that you can actually shoot and practice with and enjoy shooting and get comfortable and competent with. I'm not saying there's never a place for a Magnum, but probably hunting whitetail deer on the East Coast, there's not a place. I mean, more is not always more. And for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And there's no free lunch in that. I'm not saying the 7 Mag is a bad cartridge. Probably it's one of the best all-around North American game hunting cartridges, including if you're going to hunt elk where I am in northern Idaho, but not hunting the cypress swamps of the southeast, right? Same thing with handguns. More is not always more. On paper, some rounds look really good. Heck, on paper, the 40 Smith & Wesson looks like a good round. You get almost as much capacity, you get a lot more bullet weight, you get high velocities, then you actually shoot one. Take some abominable, without doing a lot of changes, they just shove a 40 into it. And you shoot one, and then you actually shoot one on a clock, side by side, and put a practical target like a IDPA target at 7 yards. Seeing how many rounds you can get off in a practical time, like 2 or 3 seconds, and how many consecutive hits you can get on target. I don't care how much better the 40 looks on paper than the 9mm. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I'm just throwing numbers out here. I don't remember what my actual results were, but I switched to 9 back when everybody was still thinking you had to not everybody, but the consensus when I was a cop was you had to have 40. 45 was good too, but nobody runs 9 anymore. And I came to the conclusion long before the FBI started swinging back to it that no, that doesn't make a lot of sense because I can get a lot more fast, rapid hits on target with a 9 than I can with a 40. And I don't care how good you tell me the 40 is ballistically, it's not going to make up for that. It's not that dramatically better. On paper, sure. On paper, it's a better cartridge. But in reality, when you actually shoot it, it's in no way, shape, or form as good as a 9mm. Unless you shot it in a gun to really take advantage of it. Which is not most common polymer striker-fired handguns. So that's a big one, I think, especially people that don't have a ton of trigger time. I don't care how much you say, just man up and handle the recoil. Again, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. I don't care how good you control recoil and how fast you can shoot with a high recoil round. If you reduce the recoil, you can go faster. It's just how it works. I don't care how good you can control the snap of that 40. All other things being equal, like a very similar platform of gun, you're going to shoot faster on a, let's say, practical course of fire with a 9mm. And again, I'm not saying there's never a time for other cartridges, but in general, don't just go by what's on paper. Actually get some trigger time in. There's no free lunch in ballistics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So consider that. Don't just buy something based on what's on paper. I've been there and done that too. Anyway, I really do hope that this saves any of you guys out there listening some grief, some money, some time, some frustration. Again, this podcast, it's not really for me, it's for you guys. I've been blessed with these things, and blessings are meant to be shared. If you enjoy the podcast, if you enjoy the message, you want to grow it and help other men out, consider supporting the podcast. There should be a link for Patreon in the show notes. If you just want to throw a couple of bucks, there should be a Venmo link too. But if you want to consider becoming an active part of the tribe instead of a passive listener, maybe man up and become a patron. Patrons get a lot of cool insider content, but mostly do it because you believe in the podcast. You want to help improve other men in this area, in this arena, and you think this is a good venue to do that. Again, consider becoming a patron. With that, your tactical tip of the day and your tactical verse of the day. Now, tactical tips, I think there was a lot of them in this episode, but I'll try and give one pretty specific. Going back to gunsmithing stuff, you probably know that hex bits, Allen wrenches, right? Torx bits, they come in different sizes. Well, so do Phillips head and flathead. If you're working on a really nice gun, a really high-end gun, if it's a flathead or a Phillips, that doesn't just mean any flathead or Phillips, right? Get the proper size so you don't really mess up a gun. Now, if it's a working gun, like I'm looking at my carry gun that I carry today, a SIG 226 single action only, I can tell I've taken the grip screws off before. I marked those up. But if it's a really nice gun, remember that Phillips heads and flatheads actually have sizes too, right? So if you're working on something like an antique Belgian Browning high power, maybe wait till you have the right size flathead before you go turning those screws and marring them up. Flatheads and Phillips have sizes too. Your tactical verse of the day. Hopefully what you care about more than the tactical tip, more than the episode. A little rapid fire from the hip sermon. The words of Almighty God. Originally from the Torah, but recounted in Romans. I will have mercy on whomever I have mercy, and I will show compassion on whomever I show compassion. Everything that God does is true and just and perfect and holy. He has mercy on who He wills. And it's a great and marvelous gift that He has mercy on us. Not because we are good, because He is good. It's grace. It's not about us. It's about Him. It's not about how good we are. It's about how good God is. And He is so good. So good to have mercy on us. The Bible says we loved Him because He first loved us. Let us be thankful for the gift, the undeserved gift of mercy that we've been given by the Creator of the universe. With that, thanks for listening. Have a blessed day.